Okay, agree?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is the Policy Leadership Group meeting. It is Thursday, July 16th. We're going through this year pretty fast. So we have a full agenda today. And I guess we'll start off with, who am I turning it over to, Mike? You, and then you'll turn it over to someone.
No, I think I'll just have Bob start us off.
Okay.
You might want to ask Chris Hines to identify himself for the rest of the group, Victor Christine.
Yes, I was going to say, Victor has had a transformation.
Sorry.
Could you identify yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Chris Hines, legislative aide for Victor Chris. I'll be sitting for the commissioner today. You would like me to let everybody know that he is sorry he is unable to attend the PLG workshop today, as he needed to be with his 3-year-old daughter, Sophia, who is undergoing surgery today.
Yeah, having a tonsillectomy or something like that. The fun stuff.
Yes.
Careful, Hidden.
Exactly. And I know you want to also read the statement, and I think since you've identified yourself, we'll just go around and make sure everybody knows who's here.
Stacy White, County Commissioner, District 4.
Ken Hagan, County Commissioner, District 5.
Bob Buckhorn, Mayor of Tampa.
Sandy Berman, County Commissioner, District 1.
Al Higginbotham, Hillsborough County, District 7.
Rachel Ura, Temple Parish Mayor.
Les Miller, County Commissioner, District 3.
Kevin Beckner, Hillsborough County Commission, District 6, Countywide.
Okay, Bob, it's all yours.
Also, just for the record, Rick Lott notified he could not make it, but Mike Herr, the city manager of Plant City, is here today representing him. So I think everyone is at least represented.
Is he going to sit up here with us?
Probably not a bad idea.
Yeah, is Mike, you here? Come on up.
I'm going by taking my off.
You feel like old times, she's sitting at the table with the mayor over here, right?
Absolutely. The mayor's a great guy.
All right, sorry.
Okay, Bob.
Yes, ma'am. Bob Clifford, Carson Free Drop. Wanted to go over for you just kind of a recap of the recommendations and the next steps. Moving forward, as you recall, we talked about last time the challenge, the fact that citizens are telling us transportation is the #1 issue. We increasingly are having challenges related to our roads and intersections. They believe our transit system is presently inadequate. Congestion continues to build within Hillsborough County. We lack options, so we hear it very clearly, and it's going to get worse. We see that coming. So think about the choices. We can do nothing, or move forward with a plan that is balanced, fair, and community-driven. Looking at those things that we heard very clearly and saw was fixing and maintaining existing roads, looking at the issue of relieving traffic flow congestion, bottlenecks, build new roads, widen new roads, transit, W transit service, premium transit, and make walking and biking safer and more efficient. Those are the things that we've seen from the challenge and the choices side of things. Again, recapping what we heard previously, going into the recommendations we provided you all last time. Look at that balanced strategy, plan and strategy that does those things, addresses congestion, the bottlenecks, the traffic flow, transit, and the issue of premium transit, modernizing and extending the streetcar. You can look at placing a 0.5% sales tax referendum on the ballot in 2016 with a 30-year duration. Look at targeting that as a 2/3, 1/3 split between roads and transit, allowing jurisdictions though to make the choices for what's important to them, that community-driven piece that we've talked so much about. Look at the allocation being driven from the perspective of going to the jurisdictions, plus the addition of a 25% of the distribution going to HART to really build that foundation for transit. Talked about the issue of need to insure within the county that new growth pays an increased and equitable share of its impact on transportation. That's that mobility fee discussion. The issue of the flexibility in looking at addressing maintenance and looking at making sure you've got a program process to deal with that. Looking at making sure that we're all working together, working across those jurisdictional boundaries, allowing the flexibility and options for the city and the counties to utilize their funds for the things that are important to them, particularly as it relates to transit within the city of Tampa, that issue of premium service related to the streetcar and other types of service. Hillsborough County, bus rapid transit being a key issue of importance within the county. Temple Terrace and Plant City, express bus, circulator type services within those communities, so they have that flexibility to address transit and utilize their dollars to match and partner with HART to get the types of improvements and projects that they're looking for related to their community. Looking at the issue of developing the plan and solidifying the first 10 years, if you will, in terms of a project list that would go with the referendum, the issue of ensuring accountability, utilizing processes to make sure we're letting the public know what's happening with the projects and how that comes about and how they come about over time. Additional recommendations are the issue of ensuring that we're realigning the projects and efficiently looking at all the priorities and matching up the work that the different jurisdictions do. We're talking about the local jurisdictions here, but we also have other entities like, say, FDOT, and ensuring that we're working in coordination and being consistent with them to ensure that we're making the best and most efficient utilization of the dollars to get the most product and the best product as far as you can go forward. The other issue of looking at policies and plans and implementation activities related to the changing world we live in. Relating to alternative forms of transportation and technology, and being prepared to move forward into that direction to address those things. Those were really the kind of the highlights, if you will, of the various recommendations. Then we start to talk about where are we going from here? What are the next steps? Recall last time we laid out a process of what would happen from here. Starting to move forward is to continue that engagement, that issue of continuing to engage with the community. I mentioned that list. That's a critical component. The development of that list. We've got potential projects that could go on it that have gone through different criteria and analyses, but now bringing that all together by jurisdiction, going back out to the communities to ensure that we are hearing what they're saying and ensuring that we put together the best plan and the best list that addresses all the needs that we're trying to deal with as we move forward. The other issue of ensuring that that information is clear and consistent. We've got a lot of different entities involved here. HART is going through their transit development plan. They've been a great partner with us as part of this effort. That's a big component of the overall plan in terms of the projects that come out of there, ensuring that we're consistent and coordinated with them and participating with them in the development of their transit development plan, which is a requirement they have to do, and they're moving forward with adoption of that in the, I believe, late September time period. But that's going to be a critical component of this, making sure that we're drilling down and talking to folks throughout the community in the various different parts of our county and our cities, looking at it from the perspective of small group meetings, homeowners associations, chamber-type meetings, drilling down and having conversations with them. What we thought was also important, though, was to really even drill down a little further, and we have what we call these community meetings and holding them at the libraries. There are, within Hillsborough County, 28 libraries. Go to each one twice. Go day and night, depending upon where you are. So we're giving people the most opportunity to participate, find out what's happening, to go there, find out the information, see the plan, see the types of projects, provide us the input on those projects so that the jurisdictions and you all ultimately can be able to look at all that, put it together, and have a firm, fully vetted list that we really got out there and worked with people and talked with people. That's in addition to all the things that we're already doing related to social media, the website, all of those activities. So also key elements in terms of that plan, and in terms of receiving that input and engaging the public as part of that. We really want to look at it from this perspective of kind of drilling down here. You were able to geographically disperse it, get out there, and make sure we hit kind of all of the areas. We thought that was critically important. Hearing from you that we need to make sure we're touching everybody as best we can, and giving people as much opportunity as we can to participate in the process and be able to provide that input, feedback to us related to the types of projects that would go forward as part of this plan. That's the key element as part of that. That will occur over the next few months. That's in addition to what's happening with HART Transit Development Plan. So we're also making use of HART being out there and working in partnership and concert with them. Those are other additional input opportunities for everybody to really get that feedback, and discuss the projects and the lists. As I just mentioned, the TDP really gets there. We're looking at it all the way through the process in terms of we get the community feedback, the jurisdictional feedback, the HART TDP, put it all together and ultimately be able to deliver that first initial set of list of projects that would go with the referendum in the coming months. We looked at that in that October and November time period, to have that full list out there, so it's been fully vetted by everybody and it's been part of the process. And we've been able to be as flexible as possible, but also as detailed as possible to be able to get all that information and put it all together for you, to have that clear, defined list. That, Madam Chair, is kind of a quick highlight, and I know we talked about a lot of things as part of that, but did want to give you that update on kind of just where we are in terms of what we told you all last time, and then how we see moving forward in the coming months.
Okay, are you gonna, you're next? Okay.
Thank you. I just want to take you through items 2 and 3 on the agenda. So this would be proposal for what happens from here. Jumping to number 3 today, what we are hoping happens today is that you have an opportunity to ask any further questions about the recommendations which you saw at the last meeting Bob just summarized. But that at the end of today's meeting, that there be a vote or indication that this group does endorse the recommendations. If you want to amend them, of course, you can do that. But to really make that clear decision today that we are going to move forward in the next steps that Bob just described, which would be the outreach and community projects. So assuming that that occurs, what we are proposing then would be to come back to the PLG at your November 5th meeting, which is already on your schedules. So at that November 5th meeting, we'd be bringing back to you the detailed project list that Bob just described, gleaned from the community, gleaned from our other stakeholders. We would also at that point want to bring back a draft ordinance and ballot language for the 0.5% sales tax referendum. So that would all come back to you at your November 5th meeting. At that November 5th meeting, assuming that everyone still feels comfortable going forward, I would suggest then that the county commission would go into special session at that meeting to set a public hearing in December to actually hear the ordinance, get public comment. So that would be a proposed kind of way to go through this process. So December 2nd, there's 2 county commission meetings in December 2nd and December 16th, at which the ordinance could be heard in a public hearing and action taken if that's the pleasure of the group. Between now and November, kind of switching subjects but related, Bob had mentioned this, on a parallel track, the county commission, beginning really July 29th at a workshop, will begin the process of looking at 2 things. Mobility fees as a potential funding source for new development, and companion land use decisions that help to foster more sustainable transportation infrastructure and also foster transit-oriented kinds of development, more transit-oriented kinds of activity, because if we continue to, or if we fail to do that, we will continue to incur ever greater costs of building roads, providing bus service, et cetera, et cetera. So it really all comes together, and really has to come together for this thing to work. So July 29th is the first formal workshop the County Commission will have on that subject. There will be other workshops throughout the summer and into the fall. And so we'll have to really see how those details play out. The other thing is revenues. The recommendations obviously include a recommendation for a 0.5% sales tax. We did provide in the materials delivered to you in prior discussions with you a picture of all of the potential revenues that could be available. We talked about gas taxes, property taxes, utility fees, and all kinds of things, and showed you what those could buy and what they can't buy. You know, in the end, if anybody has a right to be disappointed, I'm probably the one to be disappointed that at this time, 1% sales tax just does not seem to be within reach. The voter survey said that people are feeling better about their own personal financial situations. There's a much higher level of trust in government, and they are willing to support an investment in improving our infrastructure. But as we relayed to you last time, that support is for a 0.5% sales tax. Sales tax is also really the only balanced choice, because tourists pay for it. They use our infrastructure. Those who work outside of the county, work in the county but live outside the county, also pay that sales tax. Gas taxes were not popular among voters surveyed, nor was property tax. Gas taxes are simply an unreliable and declining source of revenue. If we levied the 5 cents of gas tax tomorrow, what would it do for us? It would bring us back to the level that we should be for annual maintenance of our roads. It doesn't catch up the backlog. So the backlog continues to get out of control, which means that at some point we have to begin replacing roads, which is extremely expensive. Gas taxes are not the silver bullet that folks think it is. Over the last 5 years, we've lost over $350 million in property tax revenue because of the recession. But the County Commission, working with administration, has managed to be more efficient, to reduce the cost of service. We haven't eliminated any services, despite losing $350 million in revenue. The cost of government is 11% less than it was 5 years ago. A portion of my budget, of our budget, that could be used to pay for transportation, excluding fire rescue, which is an essential service, is about $207 million. I will continue to look for savings regardless of what we do with transportation. That's just who I'm about. It's about what our organization's about. But I can tell you today, there's not $25 million of efficiencies in a $207 million budget. If we want to use our existing budget to fund transportation, we will have to make tough choices about eliminating services that people depend on. I would argue that this community is better than that. This community needs services. In fact, those services are an important part of economic development. Parks, decent code enforcement. Every single service we provide is about building a community that attracts people and keeps them here because they're proud to be here. So digging into what's left of my budget that's available is not the answer. It just simply isn't. I haven't heard anybody who's raised that notion come to me with any specifics, with any ideas. So what we are faced with, I believe, at this point is the only viable choice. I'm the last one to want to tax anybody, including myself, but it's an investment. It's an investment in our economic prosperity. It's an investment in our children. It's an investment in our future. It's a balanced revenue, which has currently voter support, and that's why we're bringing it forward to you. Last thing on my agenda is that Bob talked about the next step, various public outreach meetings. I have looked at this from every angle. I wanted to try to get to a place where I felt that with my staff, the city staff, our staff, we could somehow pull off this last phase of public engagement without expending any more dollars in consultants. We can't do it. It's a full-time job. My folks already have a full-time job providing service to our residents. So I'll be proposing that we do engage Parsons for this last phase. We have arrived at a scope of work of $325,000 to do all the things that Bob described. In talking with the cities, they are willing, and also the Expressway Authority, they are willing to share that cost with us. And assuming that you give us your indication, your sign that you want to move forward, we'd be then executing an agreement this week for the last phase of work. The county's portion then would be within my approval authority, and unless I hear from you today that that's not what you want me to do, I would be exercising that authority. Your Buckhorn and Plant City and Temple Terrace will also be providing the funding, as well as Joe Wagner with the Expressway Authority. So I think that's, and I appreciate that, we all do. It shows real commitment. It shows a real partnership here. If we want to do this right, it costs something. It's a lot of money. I don't mean to minimize it, but it's a small investment given the opportunity cost of doing nothing. So it's not the cost of this effort, it's the opportunity cost. It's the cost of the missed opportunity of taking our transportation system and our economic prosperity to where it needs to be. So I would propose it is a good investment of taxpayer money. It will get us the result we need to move this forward. And with that, we stand ready for any questions or for your discussion. We're finished with our piece of this.
Okay, if you would like to go first, Mike Lawrence had his hand up first. Then
Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Pfeiffer.
Appreciate it. I don't know, Mike, if you're the one that's going to answer this or not. Just a couple procedural questions. In terms of the referendum, in terms of any kind of language that comes up over the course down till November 5th, I guess. We're going to be looking at these specific projects. And of course, we're right now going through our transit development plan. That's probably going to dovetail with some of the projects that the county wants to do in the city and so on. The language of the referendum, though, itself does not include those projects, right? I mean, the projects are there in order for us to present to folks, to tell them what we were going to do with the money, but the referendum itself is going to be much more general and more, a document saying we're passing this in order to go towards these particular plans. So it'll mention it, but it won't necessarily be specific. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The statute, statutory language for referendums limits the ballot question to 75 words. But as we did in the CIT process, we had a detailed, exhaustive list of projects that were not part of the ordinance. But I believe it was a different process, but every jurisdiction that would receive the CIT money through some process adopted those projects that the public could then know, here's what we're going to do, here's what it will cost, here's when we'll do it, and we'll report back to you as we do it. So that would be a companion document to the ordinance, but not.
It's mentioned in the referendum, but not necessarily specific, meaning that the plan changes, as you know, our TDP changes based on both the monies that we receive, and it can be aspirational. And my guess is that we'll have both of those in our TDP once we go through our process. A second question about, and this is really more of something I want to ask you to do for us, because we've looked at how we might be able to leverage dollars that HART could potentially receive from voters by referendum. I want to find out how the mechanism of the bonding authority would work in terms of what we would do, either HART or through the city or through the county, in terms of how that's going to work. kind of the mechanism. I'd like to see if we can get a report back from, a staff recommendation or suggestions from Bonnie Wise and Sonia Little and some of your staff and our staff and everyone else to make sure that I want to find out how that affects all of our long-term debt and some of the other things that we're going to do, what these potential leverage dollars are going to be and how that's paid back over a 30-year period, so that we are more prepared as an agency, both in terms of HART and the City of Tampa, to go forward in terms of what this means for us for the next 30 years. I'd rather not have any kind of surprises or what that cost is going to be, so that we're preparing ourselves for those specific projects. So it kind of dovetails with each one of them. And if you don't mind asking your staff to provide that, and we'll ask our staff to get together and try and figure that out, because I'd like to know what those real dollars would be based on the expectations in terms of not only what we're receiving, but how much time and how much money we need to repay the bonds as we go forward.
Sure. I'm not anticipating, I'll answer, well, we'll certainly do what you just requested. We'll come back to that. The ballot language itself, I'm not anticipating would say anything about the authority to issue debt. It would simply be to approve the half-cent sales tax. So that would mean that each jurisdiction in HART would make its own decisions about whether to issue debt or when or how. And that's all constrained by how much revenue you get over what period of time. And so that's the way I would kind of see this playing out, so that each jurisdiction would have the maximum flexibility to make its own decisions. But we can certainly bring back some scenarios on what that would look like.
That's exactly what I'm looking for, and I appreciate you doing that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Becker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mike, one of the things, you had gone through the revenue sources, and actually we had a brief conversation on this, but I didn't know if you could elaborate a little bit more. One of the things I didn't find in detail inside the report was the option that Pasco had engaged in, which was tax increment financing to help finance transportation. Is there any comments you can make around that, or is that still an option that we could go into further detail as we move on down the road?
Yeah. Pasco did it for a specific reason. They linked it to their mobility fees. Their mobility fees are set up in tiers, low to high. The idea being that to incentivize growth closer to existing infrastructure results in a lower mobility fee, lower than the actual cost to deliver the infrastructure. So in other words, let's just say every developer in Pasco chose to build closer to existing infrastructure. That would mean that Pasco would receive less mobility fee revenue than it would take to build what's needed to be built. So they had to have a way to make up that shortfall. The way they make up the shortfall is through their tax increment districts. I'm not sure that that really applies to us. It's peculiar to them. It's something that actually is one of the options. It's in here, but I don't think, and the primary reason is that we in the city of Tampa for sure, and the county, are really using tax increment districts for redevelopment needs, which we have significant needs. Tax increment districts don't produce revenue for quite a few years. The whole idea is that as you attract development within the geographic area, the tax base goes up. It just takes a long time to realize any revenue. Witness, some of the period of time it took for some of the cities' TIFs to start really producing revenue. And that's common. I mean, that's just the way it happens. So I don't think that that would be something we'd recommend here, but it's certainly an option.
Okay. The last thing I would deliver to you is just a message that's on a different note. When I was in my office hours in Odessa this morning, it had come up a couple of times. So they mentioned of transportation, and it was related to the ferry project. And there was a request, which I didn't know at the time had been made or not, of the ELAP committee providing comment around the ferry project, or the ability for them to weigh in as well. And so I told them that I would be having this meeting, and I would deliver those comments or their
Yes, absolutely. Once we know what the site is, then at that point, they would be asked for their opinion.
Thank you.
If there are no others, I'll offer up a motion. Does anybody else want to make a comment?
Well, I know we have a comment from Victor's aide, and
And I'll have comments for the discussion on the motion at such time that it's made.
Mr. Hagan, would you want to go next?
Yeah, I've got several comments that I want to make. First of all, publicly thank everyone who's participated in this process, either through the community outreach, in the 36 meetings we've had, or through email, or through the town hall that occurred. I've been on this board a long time, and yet it never ceases to amaze me the rhetoric and misinformation that is frequently promulgated in an attempt to obfuscate an issue. And this initiative is no different. So I'm going to quickly lay out, in my opinion, why we have painstakingly gone through this 2-year exercise. Over the last several years, the Board of County Commissioners has had a laser-like focus toward expanding economic development efforts and creating jobs and opportunities for our community. We recognized the inherent nexus between economic development and transportation, and as a result, this group was created with that name, Transportation for Economic Development Policy Leadership Group. Our corporate recruiters and economic development professionals have said for years that transportation is our #1 impediment in recruiting companies to relocate to our community. So it really should be no surprise that, according to the polling and surveying information, traffic congestion is the #1 issue facing Hillsborough County, at 34%, nearly twice as much as the second highest issue, which is jobs and economy. So whether for economic or quality of life reasons, the public recognizes that transportation is our most pressing issue. Hillsborough County is the 11th highest in traffic congestion in the country. Now, we can debate all we want the merits of any particular study, this study, but I'm fairly certain that TomTom is not a closet liberal or transit think tank. We are among the highest number of bicycle and pedestrian injuries and deaths in the country. And our transportation crisis is only getting worse. In 2010, our unfunded transportation need was $4 billion for non-transit and another $2.4 billion for transit. In 2015, our collective unfunded need has reached $9 billion. This does not include rail, and our population is expected to grow by 500,000 people over the next 25 years. It is painfully clear that this problem and shortfall will continue to grow exponentially. So after 2 years of meetings, public outreach, surveys, and polls, our staff, our consultant, the Policy Leadership Group, and County Commission have all recognized the obvious, that the status quo is unacceptable. If we genuinely want to attack this problem, a significant and dedicated funding source is required, one that will enable us to leverage our revenues and attract federal funding. However, the unfortunate reality is this cannot happen by reprioritizing our budget with one-time monies or with mobility fees. It must be long-term and sustainable. Like it or not, this is the only way to significantly address this issue. I want to quickly address some of the comments that I've seen as a basis for opposing this plan. It's been said that we should get our fiscal house in order, get rid of the waste and redundancy before looking to raise taxes. I need to underscore that Hillsborough County is among a select number of counties in the nation that has a AAA credit rating from all 3 credit agencies. During the economic downturn, we reduced our budget by $1 billion. We eliminated over 1,600 positions and passed a balanced budget without rating reserves. We approved a spending cap policy and reduced our property tax rates 23 years in a row. This board has been extremely fiscally conservative, and to suggest otherwise is simply devoid of reality. I've heard reprioritize your budget, focus on transportation first. I have no problem directing a greater percentage of our budget towards transportation. In fact, if you look back to the Transportation Task Force in 2008, I recommended and this board approved increasing our yearly commitment toward transportation. We were doing this prior to the economic downturn. Now, we can increase our funding for transportation, but as Mr. Merrill stated, to the expense of what departments and services. 2/3 of the available county budget goes to public safety and our constitutional offices. This leaves us, I thought it was in the 250 to 260 million range. Mike gave a little bit different number. To fund the remainder of county government, that's every other department. Economic development, parks, animal services, aging services, the list goes on. Now, this year, has been pointed out, we did have an additional about $99 million of one-time monies this year, in which staff has indicated about $45 million of that was needed to sustain current service levels. So let's just assume that we had an additional $50 million that we reprioritized and put toward transportation and decided not to fund economic development, parks, and other areas, and applied it all to transportation. While any increase would help, $50 million is 0.0056% of $9 billion. Otherwise, it's 1/2 of 1%. To put it in another perspective, we have 2 major unfunded road projects in Hillsborough County. One, there are many, but 2 of them I want to point out here are Lithia Pinecrest and Bell Shoals. Lithia Pinecrest is approximately $100 million project. Bell Shoals, approximately $75 million. If every dollar of that $50 million was used, we would only cover 1/2 or 2/3 the cost of one single project. So please, enough with the nonsense that we can simply reprioritize our existing budget to meet our transportation needs. That's just simply inaccurate. I've heard we should raise our gas tax by 5 cents, and this can be used to address our maintenance problems. Let's be honest here. Sure, we can do that at some point. Our maintenance backlog is $750 million. As Mr. Merrill indicated, 5 cents a gallon increase would raise approximately $26 million a year. But that is a declining revenue source. Even if passed, that will never enable us to catch up with our current annual shortfall, which is $25 million a year, and due to the deteriorating condition of our roads that are part of the current backlog. Because while we're starting to improve these roads and trying to catch up, some of these roads will continue to deteriorate to the point that simply resurfacing them would not fix them. And based on the polling, 80% of the public opposes a gas tax increase to pay for transportation congestion relief. 80%. In my mind, that's a mandate. This leads me to revising our land use policies and implementing mobility fees. Our board has indicated a willingness to support this, and staff is working diligently on making recommendations. From a timing perspective, I personally do not have a problem with implementing them prior to next year's referendum. However, this will not be a funding panacea. The growth management laws have made it very clear that new development is only responsible for the new capacity that the growth creates. We can complain all day long about previous indiscretions, but there are no mulligans here. New growth will pay for itself, but it will not relieve our current crisis. Now finally, unlike what has been stated in some of the recent emails that we've received, this board, or this policy leadership group, is not raising taxes. We are simply moving forward with a proposal giving the public the opportunity to weigh in and vote on the issue, this critically important issue. My position has always been, whether it's in 2010 or currently, that if government's going to spend billions and billions of your tax dollars on an issue, the public has the right to have their voice heard. This is a balanced plan that fixes our roads and tackles our maintenance and congestion needs first. It improves bus ridership while positioning our community for some type of premium transit in the future. We still need to complete the specific project list during the final phase, so this plan warrants moving forward. With that, I'm prepared to support the recommendation.
Okay, yes, I know, Commissioner Higginbotham's actually gonna make the motion. Do I know?
I just said I would, unless Commissioner Whiting, do you want to make comments?
And
Well,
Victor Chris also, his aide wants to make.
He has,
Read a statement.
he'll do that when you take the vote. It's actually Victor's vote that he wants to convey.
And that's Victor right now.
Stop! I don't want signs up.
Would you like to speak before?
Commissioner, I may or may not have comments, depending on what the motion is. So I'd like to
Sure.
reserve some time for discussion of the motion, depending on what the motion is.
Very good. In 2010, it's a well-known fact that I was up front and center in opposition to the referendum. It's not a matter of failing to recognize the transportation issue. At the same time, I was very involved in the development and the formation and the door knocking, wearing out shoe leather, and burning up phone lines and cell time, and working on bringing in corporations and companies, and saw and heard firsthand the concerns that people had. In the last 3 weeks, I've experienced those communities with transportation that's worse than ours. My wife and I made a trip via train, then by car up into Maine. We paid tolls that in some cases, a single toll was $18. We dodged potholes. We sat in traffic for hours. If we're number 11, I would hate to see what number 10 is like. It's time to make the change. It's time to move forward. But to come back around to 2010, I felt that the most important ingredient to this formula that we're getting ready to make a recommendation on, not a setting of tax or an endorsement to move this forward, but the public was in great part left out. I made a promise when I was in speaking in opposition. I see some of you in here, some of you on the first row and some of you on the back row, or towards the back, that I would make sure that we had a committee that was put together. And I want to thank the staff, Mr. Merrill and his leadership, for listening to this board, listening to me and my concerns that I had, that we had the right format for public input, and to gather as much information, because I wanted this to be community driven. I said in 2010 that I would support, and that's a long ways out, but that I would support whatever comes out of this committee. If it gets derailed, no puns intended, and don't read between the lines, but if it gets off mission between now and November 5th, I won't be behind the referendum. But today, what we have is a foundation. It's been driven by this community, people who are both for and against. And like Commissioner Hagan, I've read those emails that are rhetoric. Some of it well-earned, as we know, because government has been out of control in many cases. But we've worked hard. My priority was getting our bond rating to AAA. My priority prior to that was getting our reserves up, keeping our hands off reserves. So when we did get to the point that we're at today, when we got to this point, that we would be in the best position possible. And we're one of, I want to say it's about 40 counties now in the country that are in AAA. You know, staff has worked hard, community's worked hard, but come back to this, the commitment. And that was to have this meeting today, where we've worked hard for 2 years. And the work will now continue as we move to the next step, where we're going to meet here again to review this project list and a draft ordinance. And I still hope at that point to be on board, but my commitment, as I've said now 3 times, is to support our efforts today and to make a motion that this committee recommend to the county commission that we support the findings and that we move forward with a draft ordinance and list of projects for this board to review, and the county commission to take steps to set a public hearing in December. So that's my motion. Second. Thank you.
Mayor, I almost called you Commissioner Beckhorn, Mayor Beckhorn. I do want to clarify something, because I think there had been, I heard something from our administrator that we weren't going to do the ordinance
They would draft an ordinance for us to review. We're not,
in November.
right, for us to come back to in November. back for us to review. There will be the continued input and opportunity to make modifications or changes as we see fit between now and then. That was my word of caution that I hope I'm still on board when we bring that back. But my commitment today is no matter what we call this, an investment is still a tax. And I have great issues with the tax. But we're at a point where we have to make these decisions.
And that ordinance is important because that's where the language gets, tossed back and forth and it gets solidified, so.
Absolutely.
But the intent of the motion is to support the findings to draft that ordinance.
That's a quick question, I think it's probably for Mike. Your recommendation today was for the PLG to make a recommendation to the BOCC, and then after that, are we gonna adjourn and come back to the BOCC?
Not today.
Not today, we'll do that at your August 4th meeting, so the motion is very appropriate then to set the
You
foundation.
mean November 5th?
Well, we'll have to, under the county commission's board policy, you actually have to direct the county attorney to start drafting an ordinance, so it's a formality. But we'll bring something back at your August 4th meeting to take what you just described, let the board then make the formal direction to Chip to actually start drafting the ordinance.
Is it August 4th or 5th?
Actually, it's
It's 4th.
4th.
Okay, are you done with your question? I just want to ask you some further questions, because how long does it take to do an ordinance, number one? And why do we still have to do it in August? I mean, we're going to continue to discuss priorities, projects, going down the road. I mean, I know there's flexibility there, and he can make changes, but why August?
It's really not so much for your purposes. It's, again, the board policy doesn't allow Chip to actually start drafting an ordinance. But once he has that authority, then we can start working on it over the next few months to be able to bring it back to you in November. It will change, it will morph, it will evolve as the months go on. But Chip just doesn't want to be out of compliance with the board
Okay,
policies.
so what we're going to see August 4th will be an outline,
Nothing.
more or less like what you have.
No, you'll see nothing on August 4th. All you're going to do is say, Chip, please start drafting an ordinance.
Authorize.
Okay, so we have Commissioner White and Commissioner Chris, and then I'll make some closing comments.
Sure.
I just want to say that I'm truly honored to serve on this Board of County Commissioners, and I'd like to thank my colleagues for their strong leadership, and I also want to thank Mr. Merrill and his staff for their strong leadership, and I'm sincere when I say that. You and also previous colleagues have seen concurrency gutted. You managed tight budgets throughout the Great Recession, and you've still funded core services. But I'm firm in my assertion that growth, and particularly suburban sprawl, has not paid for itself. And I'm awaiting those concrete, detailed plans that we've talked about on how to address that. I'm also firm in my assertion that land use policy and transportation planning go hand in hand. And I'm also waiting for the further concrete, detailed information on that we've discussed. And finally, I just don't have enough information on this initiative yet. And the detailed project list, for example, would be very important for me. This county commission and policy leadership group is professional, collegial, and you know that I always seek to find a way to move forward in unified fashion. But for the reasons I've detailed, I'm a no on even drafting an ordinance right now.
Okay, you want to make your comments right now?
Thank you. Just wanted to read Commissioner Chris' statement. I would like to state my position on how I would have voted today on the work group's proposed recommendations. While I still have some reservations and concerns, I would vote yes at this point to move it forward for further discussion and consideration. But please note that that does not reflect how I may vote on the final BOCC decision in the future. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Becker?
Thank you. One of the questions that I had, do we know, Mike, yet what the outline of the meetings would look like moving forward for public comment on the the actions we're taking today, but also the project list. How many meetings are we anticipating?
Do you want to do that? I don't remember.
Yes, sir. We're looking at all the libraries twice, that's 56. What we'll have there is potential projects that will be on the list and solicit feedback from people. Are these the right projects? Should there be different ones? What should the focus be? Should it, talking about a 10-year period, should you focus on one type of project early on or later? All that will be part of the feedback loop. In addition to what the jurisdictions are also doing themselves and what HART's doing as part of their transit development plan.
And then in addition to the libraries, we know there are homeowners associations that have requested, for example, that we come out to meet with them about the projects. So there will be a number of those meetings in addition to the formal meetings at libraries. So that's, I don't know how many meetings it will be.
When do we expect the meetings to all the meetings to have concluded by about what day?
We're looking at presently right now, the second week of October.
Second week of October. Okay. And then I would also assume that I know that Parsons Brigham will be doing some of the presentations. You mentioned HART. I'm assuming that the presentations, that even if they're from different agencies, are going to be the same. HART's not going to be talking about projects that aren't involved with this, based on their other master plans. My whole point is I just want to make sure that we're not committing confusion about what we're presenting to the public that would be part of the referendum versus what might be part of other transportation plans.
No, Parsons will be working closely with HART staff. It's HART's TDP program, obviously, but we want to be sure, for the reasons that you just stated, that there isn't a disconnect, and that in the end it all comes back together, it all fits hand in glove.
Okay. And then when does the Board of County Commissioners have to make the final decision on the project list that's going to be presented to the voters?
Well, each jurisdiction will want to take a different path as to how they approve projects in their own jurisdiction. But just speaking for the county commission, I would suggest that, at the time the board votes on a referendum, you would also want to vote on the projects that are in the county's purview to then become part of our capital improvement program.
So then are we just here at this meeting as the PLG just going to have one meeting to discuss the recommended project list, or is there going to be an additional meeting to discuss?
That will be up to you. We can come back and give you an update along the way before November 5th, which is the date I mentioned.
That's just the only suggestion that I have, is that it just seems like November 4th is a long time away, and I know that you all have a lot of work to do out in the community, but I would just prefer something intermediate. You can just get an update on how things are going, what projects are still in play, consideration, et cetera.
I think you actually still have meetings on your calendars between now and then, so we can do that certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to make some final comments. Going through this today reminds me of the legislature a lot. Remember, we'd have big bills and first committee of reference, and there'd be opposing sides, and we just agreed to move it forward because it's still kind of a work in progress.
That's how you all shut down my amendments.
That's right. Yeah, I'm glad you remember that. But anyway, and that's how I feel where we're at right now. And Commissioner White, I understand your concerns, but we are a work in progress still. We're going to look at still more things, and I agree with you. But this is really a big deal. This is a big deal for our community. Yes, transportation is our #1 priority. And I think this will be, I know the mayor always uses it, the game changer if it's done right. Commissioner Hagan mentioned all the reasons why. The number 11, worst in traffic congestion, that's nothing to be proud of. If anything, that should be what propels us into doing something. Because remember, I've always said doing nothing is not an option. We have to do something. we just have insurmountable traffic issues in our community. But, you know, I think we have more work to do. I appreciate the hard work that staff and actually all of us here at the PLG have put into this. I thank all of you for being here. This is certainly, we've done so much research and the public outreach, all those things. But we do have more details to work on. I have made it clear, I want to see the detailed project list, because at the end of the day, in November or whenever we take that vote, if my community in my district does not get benefit from this plan, I will not support it. And it just, that's plain and clear. East and South County have not been, gotten their fair share of transportation dollars. And we need to kind of right that ship. I'm going to support moving forward today to keep this process going. But I think what's very clear is that the final vote, the final approval will rest with the Board of County Commissioners. And just so everybody understands that today, that this vote is a vote to move it forward, not necessarily to vote to approve the recommendations. And I think that's a critical difference. But I do need to understand a little bit more of why we need to raise taxes. I want to listen, I want to learn more, I want to see more information. I think we're at a decision point where we need to spend more time understanding that particular point of why we need to raise taxes, because we as electeds at the Board of County Commissioners are going to have to share that burden to explain to the public why we need to do that. And I think that's critical. And the job of leadership is going to rest on our shoulders to get this done and have a viable plan that's got vision to it and options. But my number one concern is that, and I think we need to keep working on this plan. The HART TDP is a critical element of this plan. We're talking about giving all that money to HART. Well, we don't even have the TDP yet. The priorities for the projects, the mobility fee discussion, I completely want that decoupled from this whole discussion. We talked about mobility fees. I remember Mark Sharp bringing that up. How many years ago? 3 years ago, he wanted to get that done. The express routes, the BRT lines, where are they going to look like? Where are those routes going to be? And because at the end of the day, this transportation system is going to create jobs. It's going to get people to work. It's going to bring about more economic development along those corridors. And that's what we're here to show. I am a little worrisome about the poll. Not going to be shy about it. 52, 53%. If you're running for office and you have those kind of numbers, you're going to be working a whole lot harder to get those numbers up. And I think whoever's going to run the campaign, who are we going to hand this off to? That's going to carry our message. I'd like to see a plan for that. The people that have complained that there's no vision for transit, in a way, they're right. We need to have a little more vision in this plan. And I think with hearing a lot of these concerns about we're not high enough in the polls, we don't have enough specific details of the plans and who's going to run the campaign, these are all questions that really need to be answered. But I have complete confidence we're going to get those answers. And as I said at the last meeting, we can't afford to screw this up. This is a moment in time where we need to work on it and get it right. So with that, Commissioner Higginbotham, this actual body, because I actually took Fletcher, are we authorized to really vote and make motions? It is more of a ceremonial action, just to let everybody know. But we have a motion by Commissioner Higginbotham. It was seconded by Mayor Buckhorn. And I will, as a vote of consensus, I will ask all to say aye.